So in this part of the recording, we are going to deal with how can we organize the data that we are dealing with in business objects. So there are going to be two parts. One, in the first part, I'll show you different kinds of graphs and charts available, and then a little bit on formatting. I'm not going to spend too much time on formatting. Those are things that you can easily pick up. My goal is to mainly show you the tool, teach you the concepts and little things here and there, changing color and all of that you can pick up. And then in the second portion of this recording, I will talk about things like breaks and sections and sorting and filtering and those kind of things. So let's start with how we can display the information in different formats. So I'm going to bring in one more measure. Maybe I'll bring in another dimension. And then I'm going to rerun my query. So the city object I'm bringing into the report. The quantity sold, I am bringing it to the report here. And then I'm going to bring the category object. Okay, so this is all of the data in my report, right? And then if I scroll down, I can see that it kind of ends here, but down at the bottom you can see the page numbers as well, right? So you have page number 1 and then page number 2, and this has 11 pages. So just always keep in mind, sometimes people just cannot find this page number down at the bottom, and they think, well, this is all the data that I have. It's not showing all the data, but there are pages down at the bottom, right? So this is my detailed report. Now I already had the summarized report. Let me get rid of this guy. I'm going to call it summary report, and then I'll show you what all other formats are available for me to display the information in. So if you go to the report elements tab, this has tables, cells, sections, charts, and others. So in terms of tables, you have something called a vertical table, which we have been playing around with. You have a horizontal table, and you can bring in, click on this and click on the plus sign, which inserts a blank horizontal table, and then you can populate it with data. So you can kind of bring in you can bring in an object. I mean, the difference is in horizontal table you have the column headers on the left and the data on the right, and then you can bring in your measures or other columns that you want to bring in, right? And notice when I bring in something, it's the same thing that I've shown you before. If I bring in and drop it here, it's going to override. If I basically want to append, then I have to do this, right? So I think you probably have already followed that part. So this is a horizontal table. Again, I don't know if you are going to be using horizontal tables too much. Most of the times it's vertical tables. If you have to remove this, you can highlight this and hit the delete button, or you can drag it over to the left. Then you have crosstabs. A crosstab is basically a combination of horizontal and vertical table. You have some column headers on the left and some column headers on the top. So I can probably put the year column here, and then I can put the state column to the side, and then I am going to bring a measure. Typically not always. You have a measure in the body, and then dimensions in the column headers on top and sides. But I've seen reports where there are dimensions in the body as well. So it's up to you. So this is a standard cross tab. You can do other things with it as well. You can bring in more columns here. You can make it a more complex cross tab if you want. But that's kind of like a standard cross tab. I'm going to get rid of this guy. Then you can insert some cells. There are some predefined cells as well. So if you are creating a very formatted kind of a report, you can basically do page numbers at the bottom of the report. It shows you page number 1 again. I mean, you can do it in the footer as well, right? So you can grab the cell and then add it to the footer and then change the font size and all of that. So all those things are possible. That you'll have to do in the format. There are other predefined reports as well. Like most of the times people want to find out when it was last run. So last refresh date, you typically that goes in the header of the report. So in the header, I can put this last refresh date, and then you can basically click here, and then you can modify this. I can basically say, and what I'm doing right now, I'm going to be teaching it later on. That's probably going to be one of the last things in Webby, but you can, for now, follow along. I can say last and I'm formatting it to change the font size to something smaller, and then unbold it. Right, so typically you probably want to have, and you can remove the underlining there as well. That's nothing but a border. That's more of a bug in Webby, that it somehow it just keeps the lower border in a cell. But I think you get the idea, right? That if you are creating a production ready report, you need to have the last refresh date, who created the report, all in the header section. Then you need to have a nice looking title here, and then you need to have page numbers and all of that at the footer of the report. So these are some cells. Sections, I'm going to talk about sections separately, so let's not worry about sections for now. And then I'm going to move on to different kinds of charts that you have. So you have different bar charts, you have stacked bar charts, you have dual axis column charts, and so on. You have the line charts, you have dual axis line, area, more line charts, and so on. You have the pie charts, and then in the other, you have more charts. So you have the scatter plot, you have the bubble chart, have a tree map, heat map, tag cloud, and then you can do all charts and then get other kinds of charts as well. So if you do that, then there's a waterfall, there's a tag cloud, there's a radar chart, you have different point charts, pie charts, map charts. So I'll just probably do a tree map. When I select a tree map, then I can say for the rectangle title, notice that it automatically shows you the things that you can select. So for the rectangle title, it wants a dimension, so I can only pick a dimension. For rectangle weights, I need to pick a measure, and for rectangle color, I need to pick a measure as well. So when I do this, it creates a chart, and you can basically modify all the colors and everything, right? And that's pretty straightforward. You can just right click and say format chart, and then in the area display, this is the title, and you can make it visible or make it invisible. You can basically write a whole formula for the title by clicking on this. Then the measure properties, data values, this is where you basically can define additional colors and so on. What color palette are you going to be using? What background are you going to be using? Do you need borders, layout? So I mean, you can play around with these properties. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this basically a tree map is a good chart because you're playing with basically the size of the rectangle and the color of the rectangle. So the size of the rectangle here is showing me the quantity sold. So the bigger the rectangle means the higher number of quantities are sold. So I can clearly look at this and say, oh, I'm selling a lot of t-shirts and a lot of jewelry, and these are two of my biggest sellers. Now the darker or the greener this thing is, the higher the sales revenue. So t-shirts is where most of the business is happening. It has the highest sales revenue, and it has 29% of the quantity sold. Whereas something like jeans, I don't have that high sales revenue and I'm only selling 0.63. So the advantage of a tree map like a chart is you can easily look at this and in one snap you can figure out, well, this is not selling much or this is not producing much revenue or whatever, right? So that's the advantage of a tree map. So again, just summarizing this, that you have different formats in which you can display the information. You can display the information in charts. There's a wide variety of charts available. You can display the information in tables. You have some blank cells and freestanding cells that you can use. So, and then you can have many different tabs to represent different things. You can even have a small chart or a set of charts here. It doesn't mean that in one report you can only have one thing. I can insert a small pie chart here and then populate it with something, right? And then you can edit and add the title and whatnot, right? So these are all of the different ways in which you can display the information in Webby. Now, the next thing in this portion of recording that I want to talk about is how can we make the information more readable. So to make the information more readable, there are few options available. So let's talk about, I'm gonna, well, let's keep this chart here, but let's talk about how we can make the information more readable. So the first thing is, typically for making it more readable, a lot of times you care about the sorting of the data. So by default, when you are sorting the data, Webby automatically sorts the data ascending by the first column. So the first column is category. You can see that it's already sorted by category. If you don't want it to be sorted by the first column and you want it to be sorted by another column, or you don't like the ascending sorting, you like the descending sorting, you can always change it. So let's say I want to sort it by this column. So I have to first select this column. And then I can go to the analysis tab, and this is where the sorting is. So you can say ascending, descending, or you can define your own sorting. So let's say I want to sort the data by the state column, not category. So now the entire data is sorted by state, right? So the moment you define your own sort, you have overruled the default sorting. Now within California, if I want to have further sorting, I can do that as well. Okay, so sorting is pretty straightforward. I just wanted to show it to you. There are some calculations available predefined, and you can always create your formulas for calculations. For example, let's say I want to sum the sales revenue, or I want to sum the quantity sold. So I can click on this and again go to analysis, and there are some functions available. So I can say I want to sum it, or I want to count it, or whatever. So if I say sum, down at the bottom on the last page, I will have a sum available. Okay, so you can do these basic calculations. You can always define your own calculations if you want to. And that part I'm going to cover as one of the last few topics. So back to page number 1. So far I have shown you sorting and predefined calculations. Two other things that I want to talk about in this portion of recording are things like break and sections. So break and sections are two features that make your report more readable. And what do I mean by making your report more readable? So I'll show you. Right now you see one big block of data which keeps going from page number 1 to page number 11, right? I would argue that it's not very readable at the moment. So what can I do? I can use this guy and I can make it a section. So how do you make something a section? You can right click and say set as section. When I do that, and now this chart doesn't make much sense, so I'm going to remove this guy. When I do this, notice that it brings that column out of your table, and then it places it on the side. And now all of the data for California is basically grouped together, and then all of the data for other states is going to be grouped together. Okay, so how do I know which page of the report do I go to find other states? That's pretty easy. There's on the left hand side there's something called a report map. So whenever you use a section, it creates a map of the report for you. So if I want to go to Florida, here's all of the Florida data. So you don't have to figure out what page you have to go to. If you want to go to Texas, this is all the Texas data, right? And if you performed any kind of calculations, those calculations are going to be done for each one of the sections. So back to the first page. Can I have multiple sections? Yes, you can. So you can have subsection. So if I right click here and I say set as section, it automatically knows that there already is a section, so I'm going to create a subsection. I'm going to move it a little inwards to make it more readable. So now I have the state as the main section, the city as a subsection, and if I go to the report map now, you can see that state and city, these are sections created. So if I want to go to, let's say, San Francisco directly, I can click here and it takes me to San Francisco. Okay, so now again, as I said, the whole idea of sections was to make the report more readable, right? So now your report is much more readable than it was before. The advantage of sections is that it provides you a report map. So imagine that you are building a report for a sales director, and the sales director cares about the different regions and the different territories within the regions and the different salespeople within the region. So there is a like 3 or 4 level hierarchy that he or she is interested in. So you can create a section report with those 3 or 4 levels, and then using the report map, that sales manager can go to exactly that specific salesperson or a territory or a region and see what is going on. You can also do calculations within the subsection or subsection and display things here. So if I, for example, create a chart or whatever, it is also going to be calculating things at that level, right? So, or I can create variables that are calculating things at that section or subsection level. So the advantage of a section report is that if you have a report which is multi-page long report, like 20, 30, 40, 50 page long report, you would prefer building it with a set of sections to make it very readable, and the user can then browse through that report very easily with the report map. Okay. All right. So back to my first page. How do you get rid of a section? Once you create a section, how do you get rid of it? So removing a section is pretty straightforward. You can grab this and bring it back to the table. So if I bring it back to the table, notice that I am appending it to the right of this column. When I do that, it says, are you sure you want to delete this section? Yes. And then it deletes that subsection. And then I'm going to grab this state object and I'll do the same thing. So I'm going to drop it here and delete the section. So now I'm back to where I started. Okay. So I hope everyone is clear about sections. The last portion or last thing that I will cover in this set of recording is going to be breaks. So breaks are very similar to the sections. The idea is the same. The idea is to make your data more readable. First of all, how do you apply breaks? So let me just move this column inwards and then I'll show you. So how do you apply breaks? You click on a column and then again we are in the analysis tab, and this is a toggle button to add or remove breaks. So if I click on a column, click on breaks, then it applies the breaks. So again, what did it do? It basically lumped all of the California data together, and then move to the second page. So now you can see all of the Florida data is together, so on, right? The one thing to notice when you apply breaks is that the report map doesn't get populated. Unlike sections, when you have sections, report map gets populated. When you apply breaks, the report map doesn't get populated. Just like sections, you can have sub breaks as well. So I can apply sub breaks. I can have many levels of sub breaks, right? And any calculations that you do, these calculations are going to be done at each level. So I can remove the sum, reapply the sum. So I can have these calculations at each level, and I can have any number of levels in a break or a section. But the idea is the key differentiator between the two is that when you apply breaks, breaks do not populate the report map, which makes break ideal for 1 or 2 page long reports. But if you have a 10, 15, 20, 50 or 100 page long report with a lot of data, using breaks would not be as beneficial because you won't have the report map. So if you have a bigger report with 10, 20, 30 pages of data, you should rather use sections. If you have a 1 or 2 pager report, sections kind of waste space because it kind of brings a column out and takes space up here, and then subsection out, and that takes space. So for 1 or 2 page long reports, breaks are ideal. For multi-page long reports, sections are ideal.